Little public service announcement before we get started. I had to re-edit and re-upload this video twice due to the YouTube algorithm dragon's insistence. So this is a shorter version of the original video. But just for spite, I'm making the original uncut video available in the members only section. You interested in seeing the full uncut version? Reach in your pocket and pull out a lousy $3. You'll get access. And you'll help to support this here little channel and our battle against the YouTube algorithm dragon. In the meantime, enjoy and shalom. Today we're going to explore a subject that is as emotionally charged as it is politically important. The relationship between Zionism and anti-Semitism. You've likely heard the claim, sometimes said bluntly, sometimes whispered. If you criticize Zionism, you're being anti-Semitic. And you've probably heard the counterclaim. Criticism of Zionism has nothing to do with anti-Semitism at all. So, which is true? The reality is more complicated than either slogan. And the reason this matters is because how we draw this line affects people's lives in very real ways. It affects Jewish communities who face real threats of anti-Semitism around the world. It affects Palestinians who live under occupation or in exile and who feel their voices are often silenced when they speak up. It affects how governments write laws, how universities handle speech, and how ordinary people talk about justice and security in the Middle East. This isn't an abstract ivory tower debate. It touches on human dignity, freedom of speech, historical trauma, and ongoing conflict. So what we need today is clarity. We need to step back, slow down, and walk carefully through the key definitions, the historical background, the forms of criticism, and the test for when criticism is fair and when it crosses into bigotry. That's what I'm going to attempt to do here today. Not to give you a slogan, but to give you tools for clear thinking. Tools rooted in both empathy and truth.
One of the most notorious accusations that has to do with Israel actually lacks an amazing amount of information that can actually be used as rational arguments. So I did some thinking and I tried to see for myself, just based on my regular knowledge, how can I prove to somebody that Zionism isn't racism? So, of course, beyond the formal definition of Bernard Lewis, a very, very famous Middle Eastern historian, and many others, that Zionism really is just a form of a national calling for independence, much like the calling of the people of Tibet, much like the calling of the Palestinians. I think the strongest argument I could think about, which actually proved that Zionism isn't racism, comes not from the definition of Zionism, but actually from the definition of racism. Racism is a very, very severe form of discrimination where the focal point in order to create that discrimination has to do with the racial, physiological characteristics of an individual or of a group. So when we say that there's racial discrimination, let's say that there used to be racial discrimination in the United States, we're talking about a racial discrimination by people who were white, a physical characteristic, a certain form of race, against people who were black. Same thing happened in the apartheid of South Africa and happens all the time around the world. Now, Zionism doesn't deal with any form of race. It does deal with a social identity, with an historical identity, even with a religious one, but it's not racial. It's not a certain race to be Jewish. You can say that you belong to the Jewish people. You can say that you accept the Jewish heritage. But the very fact that somebody can convert to be Jewish is an indication that Zionism and Judaism are not racial. Now, some people will say, yeah, but Judaism says that if you're born to a Jewish mother, you're automatically Jewish, which means you inherit it by birth. That's okay, but it doesn't make it racial. And it's not like a Chinese or a Japanese person can stop being Chinese or Japanese. It's a physical attribute. It's genetic. That doesn't mean that they can't change other forms of their identity. So if you're Japanese, Chinese, black, you can still decide to be Muslim, Christian, or Jewish. So from that respect, Zionism cannot be racism because Zionism doesn't deal in any form with race. Now some people will say, I'm being technical, when they say that Zionism is racism, talking about the spirit of the discrimination of being Jewish versus the people who are not Jewish.
So the Jewish people lived here for thousands of years. We were often conquered by the Babylonians, then by the Seleucid Greeks, and then by the Romans, and then by the Byzantines, and finally by the Arabs. That's in the 7th century. That's 2,000 years after we came here and were populated here. And after the Arab conquest in particular, the Jewish numbers in this country dwindled because the Arabs actually took possession of the Jewish farmers' land. So it's not we who colonized the area from the Arabs, it's the Arabs who colonized the area from the Jews. Now that could happen. This happens in history, tough luck. Except that the Arabs didn't do anything with it. I mean, they didn't claim it as their own. They didn't make it a separate country. It was a backwater for the Arab conquerors, and they themselves were replaced by other empires who came here. And really the country didn't come back to life until the big Jewish movement to return to our land actually took root. We always had Jews living here for thousands of years, even after the 7th century. But the real movement began in the 19th century, actually by Christian Zionists. It began in Europe, in Britain, and in the United States by Christian Zionists who said if we want to bring this land, the land of Israel, back to life, you have to allow the people of Israel to come back and build it up. And that's what we did, beginning in the 19th century. By mid-century, Jerusalem already had an Arab majority, and as Jews came here from various parts of the world, we built factories, we built farms, we built cities, and this encouraged Arab migration from the neighboring countries into what is now Israel. And these people are now called Palestinians. There were Arabs before, but before they came. But the great influx and the great growth of the country began with the Jewish migrations in the late 19th century. And the Arabs who came here, they called themselves Palestinians from time immemorial, No, they're not from time immemorial. From time immemorial, it's the Jews. We came here 3,500 years ago, 3,500 years, and we never gave up our claim to our land. We didn't disappear. We came back to a land that was largely barren and empty, and we brought it back to life.
Unfortunately, our name, our identity has been hijacked by an evil, vile, selfish movement that is purely political, ungodly, and they yet insist, in order to simply get legitimacy, to use our identity, Judaism and godliness, to intimidate others, to get legitimacy, to get the right of a land, to oppress another people. So isn't it important, isn't it crucial that we stand there and tell the world, you are making, unfortunately, a grand mistake? You should know that these people who are speaking in the name of Jews have not only not been a protection for the Jewish people, and of course what they've done to the Palestinian people is known, but they are the downfall, God forbid. They are the worst factor of exacerbating anti-Semitism, because Jews have been living together with Muslims and Christians for hundreds and hundreds of years in every Arab country. And there was never this ingrained religious conflict, ingrained hate for the Jewish people. We were able to coexist without any human rights groups. What has changed? What has changed that we can't live in Muslim and Arab countries? This new movement, relatively new movement, Zionism, that started a mere 100 years ago, this has come, this is the new neighbor to the block, and since they're around, there has been contention, strife, death, misery, bloodshed, and suffering. So what is the problem? Is the problem religion? No, religion existed prior to that. The Quran and the Jewish religion existed. What changed? Zionism. What is Zionism? Zionism was a movement created by non-religious Jews, people who detested religion, Theodor Herzl, Jabotinsky, Chaim Weizmann, who wanted to transform Judaism from religion into nationalism, base nationalism, taking God out of the equation. That was their goal. And then they came in order to ensnare the religious Jews and the evangelistic Christians, and they started calling themselves the Eschalta de Gul, the beginning of redemption, that there's some godly cause to take Jews out of exile. And all the rabbis around the world spoke up and vehemently in opposition. They said, are you crazy? God has brought the destruction of the temple because of our sins, and not because of our physical weakness. And the solution is not a physical issue of going back and taking up arms. The solution is in when God, with His compassion, will make a metaphysical change where all humanity together will go up and serve God. Until that day comes, we are under oath. We are expressly on the oath of God from a prophecy of King Solomon, on the 3 oaths, not to return en masse to the land of Israel, to the Holy Land, not to rebel against any nation. We have to be loyal citizens in every country we're residing, and not to make any attempt to end exile. So this concept of making our own entity is simply ignoring the words of God and rebelling against His express commandment. And that would be forbidden for the Jewish people, even if Palestine would have been uninhabited.
What Zionism is. Let's start by defining Zionism itself. Zionism is a nationalist movement that emerged in the late 19th century. At its heart, it said something simple yet profound: that the Jewish people are not just a religious community, but a people, a nation, and as such, they deserve the right to self-determination. Like Italians, like Poles, like Greeks, who were forming their own nation-states around the same time, Jews too should have a homeland. That homeland was to be the land of Israel, the ancient home where Jewish identity was first formed, and which had remained central in Jewish prayers and traditions for centuries, even after the Roman exile. But the rise of Zionism wasn't just about longing for an ancient homeland. It was also a direct response to anti-Semitism. Jews in Europe had endured centuries of discrimination, ghettos, pogroms, and exclusion. Even those who assimilated, who became secular, educated, and patriotic citizens of European nations, often found themselves scapegoated. A famous example is the Dreyfus Affair in France in the 1890s, where a Jewish army officer was falsely accused of treason in a wave of anti-Semitic hysteria. For many Jews, this proved that assimilation wasn't enough. No matter how French, German, or Russian they became, they would never be fully accepted. Theodor Herzl, an Austrian journalist covering the Dreyfus trial, drew a radical conclusion. In 1896, he published The Jewish State, arguing that the only way Jews could live in safety and dignity was to have a state of their own. A year later, he organized the first Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland. And from there, the movement took off. Zionism wasn't monolithic. Some Zionists focused on politics and diplomacy, others on labor and socialist ideals, and others on religious or cultural revival. But the common thread was the conviction that Jews needed a secure homeland. And in 1948, after the horrors of the Holocaust and a vote at the United Nations to partition Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states, the modern state of Israel was declared.
Being that it was a land that was inhabited by a people, it becomes compounded, this rebellion against God, this ignoring of God, the whole Torah, stealing, oppressing a people, killing, maiming, destroying their houses, their properties, expelling them. This flies in the face of everything that is Jewish, that one must be compassionate, to emulate God, to uphold the Torah. This is all being done in the name of Judaism, in the name of King David, under the name of the Star of David. How could we be silent when our name, the name of God, the name of Judaism, is all being sullied and rubbed and wiped in the ground, all to commit these crimes, and supposedly they're waving this and saying this is the Jewish belief.
There is this inextricable tie between culture, religion, ethnicity that most people don't fully understand, that is unique and how can I say it? So strong with Jews worldwide. There is a, I mean, you know, I used to say early on when I was a kid, I'd say, when I was a young senator, I'd say, if I were a Jew, I'd be a Zionist. I am a Zionist. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist.
Now, why does all this matter for our question about anti-Semitism? Because Zionism was born out of the Jewish experience of insecurity and persecution. For Jews, Zionism wasn't just politics, it was survival. That's why for many Jewish communities, criticism of Zionism feels deeply personal, as if it's an attack on their very safety and legitimacy as a people. At the same time, for Palestinians, Zionism is tied directly to their displacement. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fled or were expelled from their homes during the 1948 war, in what they call the Nakba, the catastrophe. For them, Zionism isn't a lifeline, it's the ideology that led to the dispossession. Two peoples, two historical traumas, and both are real. That's why the conversation about Zionism and anti-Semitism is so emotionally charged.
Save us! We have to pray to God the speedy and peaceful dismantlement, the total dismantlement, the total disillusion and dismantlement of this rogue, evil, sinister, this state that has brought about so much death and suffering, and this rebellion against God. And this can happen because God is all the Almighty, and we pray that He should bring about it, as I say, speedily and peacefully. And then we will once again be able to live in peace, and people will see that this is only a mirage. It's only fear-mongering, the fear of the Arabs, because the history has attested to the fact that the Arab and the Muslim countries were exemplary in their hospitality for Jews, and we are supposed to and required to be grateful and show our thanks to them. So of course the time we feel so hurt and so and what would the word be, so humiliated and there's no enough words of how our hearts are wrought and are rent by the suffering of the Palestinian people, and that people think that this is done because of Judaism. This is terrible. We cry for their suffering, and we are frustrated that our voices are not heard.
When the Baker Commission filed its report saying peace in Israel is related to Iraq, you may, I was the first and only person in the Congress to point out, if tomorrow peace broke out in between Israelis and Palestinians, does anybody think there wouldn't be a full-blown war in Iraq? And conversely, if Iraq were transported to Mars, does anyone think there would not be the terrorism visited upon the Israelis every day? And so let's get it straight. Israel is not the cause of Iraq. Iraq, being settled or not settled, has nothing to do with Israel's conduct. The second part is people should understand by now, this should be crystal clear, that Israel is the single greatest strength America has in the Middle East. I always say to my friends when they say those things to you, I say, imagine our circumstance in the world were there no Israel.
So let's turn to anti-Zionism. What does it mean? For some, anti-Zionism means opposition to the ideal of a Jewish state. They might argue that no state should privilege one ethnic or religious group over others. For others, anti-Zionism is less about theory and more about policy. Opposition to Israel's settlement expansion, its military occupation, or its treatment of Palestinians. Still, others use the term in a religious sense. For example, some ultra-Orthodox Jewish groups oppose modern Zionism because they believe a Jewish state should only come with the Messiah. Because, as we know, Orthodox Jews do not believe that Yeshua was the Mashiach.
So we know that this is the solution. When this will come, the dismantlement of the state, we will be able to profusely apologize and return what is rightfully theirs. And then we can once again live in harmony and be grateful, show our gratefulness, as it has been commanded by God to us to show our gratefulness.
But the point is, anti-Zionism is not a single thing. It can be political, religious, historical, or ethical. Some anti-Zionists are Jewish themselves. Some are Palestinians. Some are secular intellectuals who critique all forms of ethnic nationalism. And yes, some are anti-Semites who cloak their hatred of Jews with the language of politics. That's why we need to carefully separate criticism that is legitimate from criticism that is anti-Semitic. So let's be clear about anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is hostility towards Jews as Jews. It includes old stereotypes about Jews being greedy or secretly powerful. It includes conspiracy theories about Jews controlling the media or the banks. It includes Holocaust denial. And tragically, it includes violence against Jewish people and institutions. Today, governments and institutions often use the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IHRA, definition of anti-Semitism. It's a working definition, not legally binding, but it's influential. IHRA says that criticism of Israel, if it's similar to criticism of any other country, is not anti-Semitic. But it also lists examples where rhetoric about Israel can be anti-Semitic. For instance, denying Jews the right to self-determination, applying double standards, or using Nazi comparisons in ways that demonize Jews.
On X, Candace Owens compared Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to Adolf Hitler, specifically responding to a comment that said, quote, Benjamin Netanyahu is everything the media wanted you to believe Vladimir Putin is. She said, feels a bit more like everything high school wanted me to believe Adolf Hitler was.
Now, no one's allowed to say that that foreign government is Israel because we have been somehow cowed into thinking that that's naughty. There is nothing wrong with saying that. There is nothing hateful about saying that. There's nothing anti-Semitic about saying that. There's nothing even anti-Israel about saying that. I've spent my entire life pretty much in Washington, where I knew and loved a number of people, including one very close person who worked at CIA. That has never prohibited me from saying, I think the CIA has done some horrible things, murdered a bunch of people, participated in the murder of a sitting US president. It's got a whole trail of crimes. That doesn't make me a disloyal American. It doesn't make me anti-American in any sense. I was born here. My family's been here for hundreds of years. I love this country. That's why I live here. So criticizing the behavior of a government agency does not make you a hater. It makes you a free person. It makes you a citizen. You're allowed to do that because you're not a slave. You're a citizen. And you have a right to expect that your government will not act against your interests.
There's also another important document, the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism, drafted by scholars who wanted to protect space for legitimate criticism of Israel while still condemning anti-Semitism. The JDA says things like supporting boycotts or calling for one-state solution aren't automatically anti-Semitic. What matters is whether classic anti-Semitic tropes are present. So already you can see the tension. Two respected definitions, both trying to draw lines, but drawing them slightly differently. That's why context matters so much.
And yet everybody has been so brainwashed into thinking that's somehow an expression of hate or bigotry, when it's not. It's a baseline question that every U.S. citizen has a right to an answer on. What the hell was this? Don't let anybody insult you, anybody, and I mean anybody, ever get away with insulting you instead of answering a legitimate question. Okay? Ever. And by the way, you will hear certain people say, well, that means you hate the person. No, it doesn't.
I see so much of the human side of things.
This brings us to the heart of the debate. When is criticism legitimate? And when does it cross into anti-Semitism? Criticizing government policies, for example, saying that settlement expansion violates international law, is not anti-Semitic. It's the same as criticizing any other country's policies. But if someone says, Jews are not a people and have no right to any homeland, that's anti-Semitic. If someone revives old conspiracies, Jews control the world, under the guise of criticizing Israel, that's anti-Semitic. And if someone holds Israel to standards that no other country on earth is held to, that can be a red flag. On the other hand, if someone argues that ethnic nationalism of any kind is problematic and says the solution is a civic state that treats all citizens equally, that's not inherently anti-Semitic. You might disagree with it, but it's a political argument, not a statement of prejudice. So again, the difference is in the details and the intent.
With informed people, they're like whispering certain words. And I'm like, why are we whispering? Why should I be ashamed as an American about wanting to know what the hell that just was? Why should I be embarrassed? I'm not the bad guy here. Why should I be embarrassed to ask what's in this war for us? We gotta go to war, shut up. You're a bigot if you don't want it. First of all, I'm not a bigot. But second, that's kind of not the point. The point is, what's in it for us? Why is this a good idea? Shut up. And it's exactly the style of argument that I voted against, and I will never accept it. I don't care who does it. I will never accept that. Give me a legitimate answer, a reasonable answer, a sincere answer, a good faith answer. We may disagree.
Why does it matter so much to keep this distinction clear? Because when we collapse criticism of Zionism into anti-Semitism, we risk silencing Palestinians and their allies who raise real human rights concerns. But when we ignore anti-Semitism inside some anti-Zionist rhetoric, we risk normalizing prejudice against Jews. Both errors are dangerous. One erases Palestinian suffering, the other endangers Jewish safety. That's why this is such a difficult conversation and why it requires us to hold two truths at the same time. That the Jews have the right to live without fear of anti-Semitism, and that the Palestinians have the right to speak about their displacement and demand justice.
Okay, so this is always the tell. This is when you know you're dealing with someone who has zero interest in getting to the truth of the question and instead is trying to make you be quiet in order to roll over you and make you obey. And the tell is when they go immediately to motive. Well, you just hate some group, or you're taking money from some other group. And neither one happens to be true in my case, but I always feel like saying, well, okay, what if I am getting paid? Or what if I have some kind of creepy bigotry? Which I don't, because I think it's immoral. God created individuals. Each one knows the hairs on your head. Each person has a soul. No person is seen by God as a member of a group. Each person is seen by God as an individual. So I don't like that. And I really don't. I'm not just saying that. And I mean every individual on the planet, regardless of what he looks like or what he believes. That is true of every person. And I sincerely mean that. But even if I didn't, maybe I was some like full wacko. And maybe I was like taking tons of money from some bad country, one of the bad countries you're not allowed to talk about or like. Qatar! That's the most hilarious. But whatever. But even if I was like on the payroll of Qatar, which I guess I can't now, but anyway, even if I was, it still wouldn't make the question any less relevant. Why is this a good idea? And their refusal to answer that question lets you know right away that you are not dealing with a person of good faith. You're dealing with a propagandist who is trying to control you.
So if Tucker Carlson is asking you that, then he has no idea, not of Jewish history, but of history. And this was documented by many great writers, whom I'm sure Tucker Carlson admires. So he should read some of them and get his facts right. The invasion, this violent massacre by these monsters who murdered 1,200 of our citizens, raped our women, then killed them, beheaded our men, burnt our babies, took over 250 hostages, grandmothers, grandchildren, to the dungeons of Gaza, where they hold them and starve them, and killed some of them. Who is Tucker Carlson defending here? Who is he defending? Talk about the ingathering of the exiles. Well, we've ingathered the exiles, but it's not only living up to past prophecies of the past. We're also shaping the future. In many ways, Israel has become the other innovation nation in the world. This has been our land for 3,500 years, since Abraham came here. And it was populated by the Jewish people for close to 2,000 years by the people of the Bible. That's when the Bible was written. It wasn't written in Tibet. It wasn't written in, in Argentina. It was written here by a people that lived here. Our identity was forged here, our faith, and our very being. And here we also wrote this book of books that changed history and the perception, gave values to not only to the Jewish people, but to all of humanity.
Now, I am not referring to anything that happened on the whole terrorism act against Israel. That was horrible, horrifyingly horrible, by any means, even war. It was just brutal. It was just brutal and inhumane. At the same time, I see Palestinian children, mothers being displaced, killed, starving to death. Two wrongs don't make a right.
From day one, the Arab countries tried to annihilate us. They tried to annihilate us right before 1967. Egypt, under the dictator Nasser, flooded the Sinai with his army, 100,000 soldiers. And Syria and Jordan joined, and they were going to wipe out the Jewish state. They said that openly. And we beat them. We repelled them. And that happened again in the Yom Kippur War. They had a surprise attack on us. And it happened again on October 7th. They invaded us with the worst massacre conducted against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. The invasion, this violent massacre by these monsters who murdered 1,200 of our citizens, raped our women, then killed them, beheaded our men, burnt our babies, took over 250 hostages, grandmothers, grandchildren, to the dungeons of Gaza, where they hold them and starve them, and killed some of them. Who is Tucker Carlson defending here? Who is he defending?
Why they're allowed to just write you off as some sort of like freak, some internet freak, hater, Nazi, whatever. No, I'm not. Just an American who loves my country, and I think it's fair to demand that the people running my country love it every bit as much as I do.
So let's bring this all together. To criticize Zionism is not inherently anti-Semitic. Many thoughtful critics, Jewish and non-Jewish, raise ethical, political, and human rights concerns about Zionism or Israeli policy. Their voices matter, and their arguments deserve to be heard. At the same time, anti-Semitism is real, and it can hide inside anti-Zionist rhetoric when people use old stereotypes, when they deny Jews basic humanity, or when they call for the elimination of the Jewish people as a people. The task, then, is not to flatten everything into one category, but to make distinctions between policy critique and prejudice, between political philosophy and hate speech, between legitimate advocacy and bigotry. If we can hold that nuance, if we can resist the temptation to smear all criticism as anti-Semitism, or to ignore anti-Semitism when it creeps into criticism, then we can have a more honest, more just conversation. Because ultimately, the fight against anti-Semitism and the fight for Palestinian rights are not enemies. For us, as believers, they're both part of the same struggle to recognize the dignity of every human being and to resist the dehumanization of any people, whether Jewish or Palestinian or of any other borders. And that's the only way forward, with truth, with nuance, and with empathy. Until next time, Abba willing. Shalom, shalom.
Yeah, I had holes in my shoes and a hole in my soul, chasing bottles and in shadows, never quite whole, but the road kept rolling and grace kept calling. Just me, two wheels, and the word when I was falling. Used to ride dirty through towns I don't name, drowning in liquor, hiding my shame. Every mile of memory, every high just a chain. Thought I was free, but I was running from pain. I slept in ditches, prayed in alleys, heard the voice of God in the strangest valleys. No roof, no plan, just the truth in my hand. One holy book and a busted kickstand, just a Bible and a bicycle riding through the storm, where the Spirit led me even when the nights were worn. I was broke, but I was breathing. I was lost, but still believing that He could take a mess like me and make it reborn. Yeah, Bible and a bicycle, that's how I was transformed.